Hi, welcome to clickmyproject.com. This video will lead us to the demo of k-nearest neighbor joins for big data on MapReduce, a theoretical and experimental analysis. Given a point P and a set of points S, the KNN operation finds the k closest points to P in S. It is a computational intensive task with a large range of applications such as knowledge discovery or data mining. However, as the volume and the dimension of data increase, only distributed approaches can perform such costly operation in a reasonable time. Recent works have focused on implementing efficient solutions using the MapReduce programming model because it is suitable for distributed large-scale data processing. Although these works provide different solutions to the same problem, each one has particular constraints and properties. In this paper, we compare the different existing approaches for computing KNN on MapReduce, first theoretically and then by performing an extensive experimental evaluation. To be able to compare solutions, we identify three generic steps for KNN computation on MapReduce: data preprocessing, partitioning, and computation. We then analyze each step from load balancing, accuracy, and complexity aspects. Experiments in this paper use a variety of data sets and analyze the impact of data volume, data dimension, and the value of k from many perspectives like time and space complexity and accuracy. The experimental part brings new advantages and shortcomings that are discussed for each algorithm. To the best of our knowledge, this is the first paper that compares KNN computing methods on MapReduce both theoretically and experimentally with the same setting. Overall, this paper can be used as a guide to tackle KNN-based practical problems in context of big data. First of all, we have to load the dataset into the system. There are three main processes in our system. They are preprocessing, partition, and then the computation. The first process is the preprocessing. In preprocessing, we have to convert the raw dataset to our useful format. For that, we have to find out the missing data in that. Then we have to replace the useful content in the place of missing data. That is called as the preprocessing. And then after completing the preprocessing step, the distance-based partition is calculated. The distance-based partition is based on the distance. First of all, we have to compare the attributes of the data set and then calculate the distance for that. Based on the distance, we have to calculate the overall distance, and then based on the overall distance, we have to calculate the threshold value. Based on the threshold value, the data set is partitioned. This is the first type of partition. This is used later in the distance-based KNN process. And then the second type of partition is size-based partition. The size-based partition is based on the data set that is present in the attributes in the data set. The content of the attributes in data set are summation, and then we have to find out the values. Based on that, the threshold is fixed, and then based on the threshold, the data set is partitioned according to the size. And then we have to, the second process is completed, that is the partitioning of the data set process is completed. After the partition process, the third one is computation. In computation, there are two types. They are distance-based KNN and size-based KNN. It will compute the clusters based on the KNN, and then the distance-based partitioned data is given as an input to the distance-based KNN. Using the data, the distance-based KNN will create the clusters based on the user giving input as number of clusters. If a user give 5 means, then the 5 clusters are created. And then the size-based KNN. The size-based KNN is processed by using the size-based partition. There also the user have to give the input as number of clusters. If the user give 4 means the 4 clusters are created and then the clusters are formed. Let us see the demo of the project. First of all, run homepage.java. For that, right click the file and select run as, and then select run on Hadoop option. Select the IP address and then click finish. Here we are seeing the home page of the project. Just click this image and then press load dataset. Now the dataset is loaded. The dataset have the number of boyu and then the day, then latitude, longitude, zonal wind, meridian wind, and humidity, air temperature, sea surface temperature, etc. Press next. Now we are finding the missing data. The value that represents 0 is called as the missing data. We have to fill some of the data instead of 0. For that we are doing the pre-processing. Press next. Now this is the pre-processing page. Here if we press pre-processing means the 0 is replaced and then the new values are present there. That is called as the pre-processing. Using that values we can use for the calculations. Here there is no 0. Instead of 0 we are replacing some other values and then press next. This is the distance based partitioning. This is the first method in the partitioning phase. Press the calculate distance. The distance is calculated for the data present in the data set. The data 1 and the data 1 is compared. The distance is calculated. It is equal so that the distance is 0. Likewise the data 1 is compared with all the remaining data in the data set and then we are finding the distance for all that. Press overall distance. This is the overall distance for the data 1, 2 and then the last data present in the data set. Then press next. Now based on that we have to find out the total and then using the total we calculate the threshold value. Based on the threshold value the partition takes place in the data set. The data 1 is partitioned in partition 1. Likewise some of the data are present in partition 2. Now the first type of partition is over. Then click next. This is the second type of partitioning. Here if we press size means the size of the data in data set is displayed here and then based on that the threshold is calculated and then based on the threshold the partition for the data is computed here. Now the partitioning of the two types are over and then press next. Now the distance based KNN is executed here. First of all the user have to give the number of K value. It represents the number of clusters. First of all before creating the cluster we have to select the cluster heads. Press cluster heads. This is the 5 cluster heads selected randomly with the distance that is already calculated. Based on the cluster heads the clusters are formed. Now press create clusters. Now the data 1 is compared with 5 cluster heads and then calculate the minimum distance. Now the data 1 is having the minimum distance with cluster head 12 so that it is gone inside the cluster 12 and then the data 2 is compared with all the cluster heads and then it finds that cluster head 9 is having the minimum distance with data 2 so that it is gone under the cluster 9. Likewise all the data are formed as clusters based on the cluster heads. Now press next. This is the second type of computation. It is based on the size so that it is called as size based K nearest neighbor. Here also the user have to give the K value. Here the K value is 4. So first of all create the cluster heads. Based on the cluster heads the clusters are formed. The cluster heads are selected randomly here and then the distance is calculated. Then press create clusters. The clusters are created. The data is compared with the cluster heads and then find the minimum distance with the cluster head. Here the data 1 is compared with all these 4 cluster heads and then the cluster head 6 is the having the minimum distance so that the data 1 is present in cluster 6. Likewise, for all the data we have to create the clusters.